Welcome to the Fast Cat Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Overton. Some call me the Big Cat, and today we are talking about power meters. And to help us along with that discussion, we have Coach Ricky Arnapol in the house. How are you, Ricky?
I am doing well. I love me a power meter. I love talking data. So yeah, let's dive into it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for joining. So, we are going to share our power meter experience from the past 22 years. And we have analyzed data from just about every single power meter there is. And as, as such, we've formed some opinions, and we're going to share those with you today. And we're also going to share you those opinions as it relates to your purchasing decision. Current modern day, it's changed. And the reason I know it's changed is because I just bought a Fouriiii the other day, and it was inspired by a new bike purchase. So we're going to go into that story, and as I understand it, I think Ricky is a Fouriiii user as well.
I am, yeah. I am lucky to be sponsored by Fouriiii this year. It is the first time I've been on one of their power meters. It's based on the Dura Ace 12-speed crankset, so it's a pretty slick looking power meter. And yeah, what type of bike did you get to put that Fouriiii on?
Well, thank you for asking. I've been spending some time in Connecticut, where my wife lives, and the road riding here is amazing. And I didn't know it. And so I was like, I got to get off this gravel bike and get me some speed. And right along that time, the new Trek Madone Gen 8 hit the
Oh,
airwaves. Yeah, baby. And it just so happened the bike shop that I have made friends with happened to be a Trek dealer, Benny Dorm Bikes. And yeah, so I called him up and I took the plunge, and I had a choice: Shimano drivetrain with Ultegra Di2 or SRAM Red, and that's how this podcast was started. Because SRAM Red, just no brainer. Just go with the Quark. Beautiful, integrated power meter with the complete SRAM Grupo. And then with Shimano, which I really like, I've always enjoyed the DI. I was like, what power meter am I going to get? Because like back in the day, it'd have been a no-brainer. Just get the SRM Durace, gold standard, one of the greatest power meters there is, but they don't make it anymore. And so I was like researching what Shimano power meter options there were, and stages unfortunately is no longer an option. And so the two best Shimano power meters, in my opinion, have gone away, and thus this podcast. So here we are. Yeah.
I think we had
Uh,
a little internal debate within the company as well. Everyone sharing their opinions on what's the best power meter, and I think there's something to be said about the sleek integrated look of having the complete group set opposed to, the third party power meter that just doesn't quite look as good. And yeah, with SRAM, no brainer, but Shimano, yeah, it's kind of become a dwindling market for compatible Shimano power meters. So, yeah, we'll
mhm.
kind of talk about what you can do if you have a Shimano group set.
That's right. That's right. And what you mentioned is I call it the Franken bike. And when you have a beautiful Shimano Gruppo, it is a darn shame to pull that crank off, because that crank is super stiff, it's light, it delivers incredible power. It's just a great crank, and like you don't want to mess it up. And I know this because I used to advise athletes, pull that baby off and let's get you this Franken crank power meter, and we don't do that anymore. But the five things that we are going to talk about as it relates to power meters in your purchasing decision are: number one, compatibility; number two, data integrity; number three, the drivetrain you have, just like I mentioned; number four, places power meters do not go; number five is price. And price has been normalized over the past 5-10 years, because long ago, price was like what you decided on, because you could get a $3,000 SRM, you could get a $1,700 cork, or you could get a power tap for about 11-1,200 bucks, and that honestly formed the purchasing decision for a lot of athletes. But nowadays, not including the components, the cranks, most power meters are around 400 bucks. You can go price them out. There's all different prices, but I went and did a price comparison this morning before the podcast, and it was about $400, give or take 50 to $100, depending on the make and the model. So prices become normalized, and so we're going to talk about the other four. But real quick, let's do the review of the week, and it's a good one, and then we'll get into power meters. So the review of the week comes to us from a Fast Cat friend by the name of Jim Thies, and he writes in, and this is a little bit longer than normal, but it's so good. It almost made me cry this morning reading it. He says, best shape of my life at 50 years old in time for my bucket list event, the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. And he says, full disclosure, I have known Frank for about 20 years. We were even on the same Pro 1-2 team in Boulder in the early 2000s, long before power meters were ubiquitous and affordable. Good shout out for this podcast. He says,
Yeah.
I have had Frank and other Fast Cat coaches provide training plans and coaching in the past. Frank did not ask for this review, nor did expect it. And I've also used other coaches and other structured training plans in the past as well. He goes on to say, I have had a few multi-year breaks from competitive cycling while focusing on other priorities like career and family. As I approached my 50th birthday, I wanted to do something big, and I decided on the Leadville 100. I reached out to Frank in September of last year, and he told me about the FastCat app. First off, I hate subscriptions. Netflix, New York Times, iCloud storage, and every other service that requires monthly payments. I feel like I'm getting nickel and dimed and not getting any real value. This is not the case with the FastCat app. I use it every day. I chat with Coach Cat every day. I swear I can hear Frank's voice in my head when I read the responses. I even ask Coach Cat questions when I know the answer just to get the validation. Chatting with Coach Cat when things don't go to plan is where I find the most value. I generally know what I'm doing, and I have many years of experience that can get in the way. I often have competing ideas about training, but Coach Cat sets me straight every time. I should also add that I listen to the podcast regularly. The app and the podcast combined are the best coaching I've ever had. As I noted, I just turned 50, and now, after 10 months of using the app, I have the best 20-minute watt per kilo I've had since I began tracking it 15 more years ago. Basically, I'm 3 weeks away from my big A event and my 50th birthday bucket list goal, and I'm in the best shape of my life, just with a little less hair, albeit gray. Well,
That's
awesome,
awesome.
Jim. Yeah, I'm almost crying right now. Thank you so much. So there you go, listeners. Chat with Coach Cat and get in the best shape of your life. And as a reminder, you can get the same improvement that Jim did by going to fastcatcoaching.com. You can start a free trial today. No credit card is required. So you really have nothing to lose. And then thereafter, you can get coached like a pro for less than $20 a month. If you choose the annual subscription, you can enjoy unlimited training plans, Coach Cat instant data analysis, custom workouts, and all the chat features that Jim mentioned, auto FTP detection, custom plan builder. It's on both desktop and mobile. And we have a new complimentary coach consultation when you sign up. That's right, we'll give you a coaching consultation for free. And then also plus in-app coaching from the Fast Cat coaches during regular customer service hours. And from coaches like Justin and Elliot and Sierra and Maddie and Ricky used to do customer service, and I do customer service. So we're all in there. And I'll say this, if you want a more custom solution, you can hire a Fast Cat coach like Ricky. True or false, Ricky? You have worn the yellow jersey in the Tour of Gila.
True.
True or false? You have won the Green Mountain stage race.
It is also true.
Listeners, do you get what I'm going at? You have a world class coach in Ricky who's coached many, many athletes, amateurs, and he walks the walk as the same talk that he talks. And he's analyzed a lot of data. And so, yeah, we're gonna get his opinions on power meters today. So, as I mentioned, the inspiration for this pod is me shopping for a bike, choosing between Shimano and SRAM, and also, FastCat used to sell power meters from 2008 to 2015. We sold power meters and we shipped them worldwide. Stages, SRM, and PowerTap mostly. And I think we might have dabbled in Garmin. We stopped that real quick. But anyway, we sold over $1 million in power meters, and then we gave all athletes a free month of coaching when they bought a power meter from us to teach them how to train with power. You buy a power meter from us, get a free month of coaching. We analyze your data, teach you how to train with power. So that's the inspiration behind this podcast. And now let's get into it. So, Ricky, you train with the four eyes.
I do, yeah. I feel like in my career at this point, I've used almost every power meter out there. I think my first power meter I had was the old PowerTap SL hub laced to a
Nice.
32 spoke Mavic rim, like the super classic little yellow computer that only had two buttons. Like, this is primitive stuff. But I'll tell you what, that thing just worked. There was nothing fancy about it, but it read good data. If you calibrated it, zero offsetted it every time, it was accurate. And yeah, it's been really interesting to see how many companies have now come to market with power meters. So I mean, it used to be, if you were a like elite level kind of athlete, you were training with power, but now it's pretty commonplace for bikes to even come spec'd with power meters from the bike shop. It's a totally new thing, way different than when I started.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the Trek Madone I got, I just said, "Hey, can you put a four eyes on it?" And they're like, "Yeah, no problem." And then,
Sweet.
like the Ventum bike that I just got through riding my gravel bike, just it was OEM with a Quark, just a no brainer. And everyone, I'm gonna show my age a little bit. 'Cause Ricky was only on the PowerTap SL, but pre PowerTap SL, there was two power meters you could buy. You could buy an SRM for $3,000, or you could buy a PowerTap for about, I think it was like around $1,300
It
for
was expensive
like,
still.
yeah, it was a hub, and then they threw on just like a El Cheapo like Mavic rim, 32 spoke. It had a harness that recorded the data at the hub and ran it up through a wire that you had to string along your bike to your handlebar. I remember like you'd wrap it around the cable housing to make it nice and trim,
Hmm.
and you could not record it on a Garmin or a Wahoo or a Hammerhead. They didn't exist then. You had to record it on like the power meter. Sorry, Ceres's um, own computer. That's the little yellow CPU. Nothing was wireless about it. You had to pull the CPU off, take it to your bike computer, and I had a special USB to serial port adapter, and that's how you had to download the data. And this was back when WKO was WKO3, and yeah, those are the dark ages. But we've come a long way from then, and so for many years, up until about 2008, it was really PowerTap and SRM, and then along came Quark, and that kind of changed the game. Now you had this mid-level price point between like whatever it was, $900 and $3,000, and I think the Quarks were like $1,700. But a lot of users quickly figured out you didn't have to buy the whole crank; you could buy the spider only, and the spider Quark only. You could send your crank to them; they would factory install it, send it back to you. Life was good. A lot of athletes just bought a new crank, but then from selling those, what we learned is first you had to find out what bottom bracket you had. Remember
Mm,
that?
mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you have and there BB30 was a thing, and then Shimano was really easy, and then SRAM. So it was a mess. So that like in the purchasing process, a lot of times people didn't have a compatible bottom bracket, so they just got a power tap. Power tap was easy, and a lot of athletes had two power tap power meters. They had a race wheel, and they had like the training
Oh
wheel.
yeah.
Yeah, and there was even an
Yeah.
aftermarket kit to make your power tap a disc wheel. Yeah, yeah.
Whoa.
It's like a
Whoa.
plastic fairing. You could buy it at Excel Sports for $100, and it
Yeah.
was, yeah,
I
it
remember
was,
the big thing, when Cork came on, with SRM, and I still honestly think that SRM is like the gold standard. They still
yeah,
make power meters, just
yeah,
not the Shimano ones like they used to. But you remember you had to send your SRM back to Colorado Springs to have the
hmm
battery replaced and have it
that's right.
calibrated. And so I think
Yeah,
when Cork came out, it was like the coin cell battery, like the first time they were using the coin cell battery, which I think at the
Hmm.
time everyone's like, oh, this is so easy. I can just change the battery myself. And it kind of put them as a big player in the market.
Yeah, no more ripping the crank off and sending it back. That was SRM's Achilles heel for a while. And then I had an SRM Origin, um, and then it had the like rechargeable battery. So just like you would
Hmm.
plug in your, you'd plug in your power meter. And that honestly, that kind of crapped out after about 4 years. So I still have that crank sitting on a shelf somewhere collecting dust because like I haven't gotten motivated to like send it back in. Um, yeah, we used to have athletes when the season was over in the off season, we'd be like, okay, send your SRM back in, get a new battery,
Hmm.
get it calibrated so that you don't have to do it in the middle of the season next year. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was a thing back then. So we've come a long way. And then so in 2012, everyone Stages came along, and Stages was a much more affordable power meter. So now you went from SRM 3000, Quark at 1700, Power Tap for let's say 900, hub only. And now you had Stages at $500, $600, depending on Ultegra, like Durace. And not only that, but all you had to do is take your left arm off of your Shimano crankset, take the left arm off and put the left arm Stages on. Super easy install. We could do it at the shop. You didn't need to like, be a mechanic, and it was beautiful. All you had to do is replace the battery, and it was way more affordable. We were the number one North American Stages dealer for 2 years in a row. Yeah, it was awesome. That was
Yeah.
when Stages was on Team Sky. Chris Froome, Bradley Wiggins were using the Stages power meters, and those are the glory years of power meters. That around then also Garmin and Wahoo were out, so you could it was Bluetooth or sorry wireless Ant Plus, and so you didn't have to use a yellow CPU anymore. You could buy whatever bike computer you wanted. It connected wirelessly Ant Plus, and yeah, life was great. And yeah, unfortunately, part of the inspiration of this podcast is so Stages went out of business earlier this year, and that just took away a lot of the wind in the sails of the Shimano, options. And so what happened with the Shimano Durace SRM, which was like Ricky was saying, that was the gold standard. That was the best power meter in my opinion. And Shimano decided to make a power meter, and so they didn't want to sell their cranks to SRM, and that ruined that. And then Shimano, we'll just go ahead and say it, like we do not trust the data in the Shimano power meter.
Yeah.
Nothing against them.
It's been,
We just
yeah.
have.
Yeah. It's been one of those things where we've tested them out, personally. I've seen the data, and it's the kind of thing where, like, it could be accurate, but
Mhm.
and I tell this to all my athletes, like, the number itself that the power meter gives you is not necessarily the most important thing. The most important thing is that it's consistent. So let's say
Yeah.
it reads 20 watts lower than an SRM. That's fine. We just, test your FTP, and if it's 20 watts lower, it is. As long as it's consistent across the board, then we're good
Right.
because we can measure progress. But the problem is that with a lot of, the power meters are coming out, the pedal based power meters, the consistency is just across the board, and that's a coach's nightmare. You're going to
Yeah.
have, an athlete doing 300 watts for 20 minutes one day, and then the next day they're doing 450 watts for 20 minutes, and you're like, wait a minute, no, this can't be the case. And then it can also work kind of the reverse way. If it reads too low and it's not consistent in that way, that can bum the athlete out. Like, no one wants to see their power going down. So
Hmm.
like I tell all athletes, all we need is consistency. And there just happens to be certain power meters that are consistent and those that are notoriously inconsistent.
Yeah. That's why we have gray hair. Ricky doesn't have any yet, but I certainly do,
I've got a
because
few coming in, and it's from that.
from these power data anomalies. And so we have this phrase called data integrity. And folks, you absolutely want to ensure the integrity of your power meter data because you're making big time decisions based on that data, and you want it to be accurate and precise. And because you're reading in how much you're improving and you're making decisions like, do I do more bass? Do I do more intervals? My power is low. My power is, you know, that's like, most people never complain about my power is too high. But yeah, so ensure that the data is accurate and precise. And so the two ways that we will break up what we'll talk about next really is there's power meters we like because we trust the data, and then there's power meters where we don't trust the data, and we'll talk about those too. So the power meters that we like, where we do trust the data, is as we mentioned, I just came off riding a court for the past 2 years. It was pretty awesome. um, what I liked about it is it did connect to the app, so you could calibrate it if you needed to. You could tell the battery life within the SRAM AXS, the app, download on your mobile phone. Back in the day, athletes used to bring their corks in, and we would hang a known weight from it and calibrate it
Hmm.
for them. We had
Set the slope, right?
the slope. We had the Ant Plus dongle we'd plug into the iPhone. We actually were using an iPod, and we had the app on the iPod and the Ant Plus dongle to connect to anyone's cork. And we charged $50 for it. And like everyone in town that had a cork would bring it in, and we'd calibrate it. I had this like contraption with a chair and a 45-pound like plate from the gym and some webbing to hang it. And there was like a whole protocol. You just ran it through the app, and you did the big ring, you did the little ring, you did right side, you did left side, and measure the deflection, and that would go into the little app they had to calculate the slope. But no, you don't really need to do that anymore. Cork developed the technology, and it's also it changes with temperature. Back in the day,
Hmm.
you know, if you started out and it was 80 degrees and you rode up the mountain and it was 40 degrees, the slope would change and then your power output would change. And you could go back and MacGyver it in the software, but now all power meter companies have solved for that with the change in temperature. So no one has to deal with that now, which is a good thing. But yeah, so we do like the SRAM cork. It works. Ricky was talking about a fully integrated, beautiful group set. The SRAM, cork integrates beautifully with any SRAM group set. It works with the 2x and really well with the 1x. A lot of the power meters, well, left side power meters work well with 1x, like on a lot of mountain bike and gravel bikes. But guess what does not work with 1x? Any spider based power meter. There's no, it needs two rings essentially. So a lot of the spider based options are not available for 2x setups, cranks. But anyway, I'm rambling now. I think also when we talk about cork, it's like, what if you want to use a cork on a Shimano drivetrain? Like, so that was my conundrum last week. I didn't really want to deal with purchasing the spider and getting the bike shop to install it in between the rings. But that's actually, if you take the time, the Court D4 Dub, as it's dubbed, is a really nice option for anyone with a Shimano group set that wants to run a Court. It's about $429 for the spider only, or $640 if you get the Court D0 crank arms. And the the Debbie Downer of that is you can't use the Shimano crank arms, which I think is a bummer.
Yeah, that was the past 4 years almost. I think we were on the Cork D4, and yeah, I think SRAM realized they can't leave Shimano out of the party just because it's also such a big place in the market. So yeah, we were, using the Shimano rings, Cork D4 with the carbon arms, put a little bit of electrical tape over the Cork logo. But man, I swear that thing was like set it and forget it. Like I used one for 3 years, no data dropouts, consistent data. The nice thing, Cork obviously has the temperature compensation, but it also has self-autoing zero throughout the ride. So anytime that you coast, I think for more than 5 seconds, it will zero itself out consistently to try to maintain accuracy across the board, which I don't know how many companies do that. I'm sure it's commonplace now, but I always just found that the cork was very consistent. And like I said, I don't want to use the word accurate because accurate is only relative to, what you're comparing it against, but just the consistency of it was super good. And the consistency from cork to cork I found
Yeah.
was very good as well, because I think even, people are calibrating these at the factory. Even within companies, you might have discrepancies be from, one power meter to the next, one stages to the other one. And I think, this maybe goes into the debate of like spider based versus crank arm based versus pedal based. But I always thought that the, SRM, cork, power 2 max, spider based wound up being very consistent across the board.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's really important. You don't want to have one power meter read one number and one read a different number. That's why you have gray hair. These days, uh, back in the day, like Quark was like, oh, we're accurate to plus or minus 3% when they first rolled out. SRM was claiming 2.5. I think Power Tap was like 1.5, 2%, and those were like good numbers. Like the original smart trainers, the kickers, they were like, they didn't even care. They're like, yeah, we're inaccurate, plus or minus 10%. No one was getting accurate. But now just about every single power meter brand out there is claiming plus or minus 1% accuracy. The same way with the smart trainers, plus or minus 1%. So whereas accuracy used to be a thing, it's just similar to price. It's become normalized, and they're all just
Hmm.
about accurate to the same thing. The thing is that when you have a quark and you compare your quark plus or minus 1% to your, like for instance, your Fouriiii plus or minus 1%, not always the same. So what I encourage everyone to do when they have multiple power meters on different bikes is go with the same brand if you can. Try to standardize
Hmm.
your equipment. So like four eyes on all bikes or corks on all bikes, and otherwise the numbers. At the end of the day, these things are gadgets. They're not really scientific instruments like laboratory grade. So there's a little bit of difference between brands. Yeah.
But if you're doing, like let's just say your TT bike and your road bike have different power meters on it, and your power on your road bike, 10, 15 watts in a 40K TT can be the difference between you winning or you absolutely blowing up,
Right.
So that
Yeah.
having that, yeah, ease of mind that you at least have consistency between the two bikes is super important.
Super important. Yeah, that's a really good point. So, especially for time trialing, where
Hmm.
most time trialists have just an acute understanding of their power at threshold for different distances and times, and yeah, it stinks if you have a different reading power meter on your road bike.
Hmm.
So okay, so power meters we like. I think everyone knows we like the Quark. It's great. There's options obviously in SRAM group sets. There's options in Shimano group sets, and then the other one is the Four Eyes. And so we've talked about that. That's $389, folks. The Precision 3 Plus left crank arm. Can't go wrong with that. I think that's
Pretty
just an
good.
incredible
Yeah.
price. Yeah, you just take your left arm off. You put your left arm four eyes on, bada bing, bada boom. Very similar to the stages. And yeah, so maybe not the most rigorous, scientific, instrument. Then I think maybe there's some durability issues. The battery life may not be terrific, so to speak. I'm just getting acquainted with my four eyes, but the price is right. The ease of installation is super easy. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a shot and see how it goes over these next 6 months.
And I think, it's worth mentioning, opposed to a Cork or an SRM, where it's that spider based power meter, the four eyes are going to be similar to stages, where it is a crank arm base. So basically, what they're doing is they're adhering a strain gauge onto the crank arms themselves. And,
Mm,
a lot of what we'll look at now is like power balance. So left and right power. So a
yeah.
cork, SRM never did power balance, but a cork does a guesstimated power balance left right.
Hmm.
It's basically measuring you at the right, and it's almost kind of, I don't know, maybe guessing the dead spot or so. I don't know exactly how they do it, but something like a four eye is actually going to be independent left and right power, which is actually really cool. because from that you can see a power discrepancy versus your left or your right leg. I think a lot of people 1%, 2%, that's pretty normal. But once you
Yeah.
start seeing like 5%, 6%, 7%, okay, that's kind of a reason to consider a leg strength discrepancy. And maybe we send them into the gym to do isometric work, or we have them do single, whatever. We basically can tell from that independent pedaling that we're either smooth and we're tracking close to 50-50, or
Hmm.
we're kind of off somewhere, and then maybe we can actually make some gains by leveling out the strength between the two legs.
Yeah. Yeah, so everyone, what Ricky was just mentioning, so the 389 price is for the left side only, left measurement only. You can get a dual sided uh, four eyes for a little bit more money. You can get the entire Shimano Ultegra crankset with dual recording for $1,289. I priced it out before the pod, so that's going to get you left right power balance. Let I think we should answer the question of who should use left right power balance, when it's valuable, maybe when to not not really read too much into it. I mean, if you're like 48, 52, I think that's within the variances of just
Hmm.
plus or minus accuracies. But like Ricky was saying, if you're 45, 55, might want to take a look. If you're injured and like your like right knee has been hurting, your right side might be 40, your left side might be 60. And if you're like rehabbing or coming back from an injury, like a hip, a knee, an ankle, anything, um, I think a great time to use power balance.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Other than that, most athletes are 50-50 within couple like 48, 52. So don't read too much into it if you're 48, 52. That's just within the normal variances. Me personally, I'm just going to go with the left sided only. I'm just shaving a few grams off my wallet there. I've been balanced for 20 years, so that's not really been a thing for me.
Yeah, I've
So,
got the Fouriiii single sided on my GRX for my gravel bike. Thing is
mm,
great. Like no problems with it. Seems consistent, so no complaints
yeah.
there.
Do you look at right left power in power data analysis much?
It, I guess it depends. For maybe myself, I think when I review my own data, like I've had injuries in the past, so I actually do like to look at it just to make sure. Or, gosh, I remember when I crashed at Tour of the Gila one year, and I crashed
Mhm.
on my right side. Oh my gosh, I
Mm,
looked at the TT data the next day. It was 60-40. It was like I couldn't pedal.
yeah,
But with athletes that I coach, I always take a peek just because it's there. If it looks within, 2-3%, that's great. If I ever start to notice it be, because I've started with athletes and I've seen, 60-40, and I've been like, hey, this might just be something worth looking at. So I take a
yeah,
peek at it. I don't dwell over it. And I tell athletes not to dwell over it too, because I think even if an athlete is notoriously 50-50, they'll see 48-52 and freak out. But honestly, that's all within the realm of air.
yeah, yeah. To me, I don't really look at it on a day to day basis. I'll actually wait for the athlete to point it out to me. Like you know, I think my left leg is favored over my right leg. Then I may take a look. The thing about it, everyone, there's not much you can do about it until you get into the gym or into the off season. It's not like, I mean, you can do like single legged drills during the season, but until you have a chance to get off the bike into the weight room, in my opinion, in the off season and do single legged squats, right, right leg, left leg, and just do some single legged exercises in general, is it really difficult to bring that balance back up to 50-50. But that's all like just what you work on in the off season. But during the season, it's like it's going to be what it's going to be for the most part.
Yeah. I think the only case where maybe you can do, I mean, I recommend all athletes at least once a year get a bike fit. I think sometimes
Mhm.
we can see a little bit of discrepancy coming from maybe a leg length discrepancy or just a poor bike fit. And I guess it's at least one of those variables that you can kind of check the box for to make sure that that's not causing a power balance. But more of the time, it's a strength thing, but it's less common than, having a big discrepancy just to be off a few percent.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. Let's talk about the Power to Max. This is the fourth brand that falls under power meters we like. Um, and this was brought up to us by Coach Justin, who's using a Power to Max. He has that spider, the Power to Max spider, inside his rotor cranks, which he was saying is super stiff. Likes them a lot. It's a great power meter. It's about 490 to 590 bucks, and yeah, good accuracy, really reliable. So that's like the fourth, power meters versions that we like. And notice all these versions are crank based. So that's a great place to measure power because what Ricky alluded to with the Fouriiii, it's a strain gauge, and that's how you measure power. Basically, the power meter companies measure the metal bending, and
Hmm.
that's the technology, to be honest. But that's why carbon cranks are so difficult, because the way carbon bends is different than metal, and it just required special strain gauge technology. So when you talk about like a spider, it's in between the two two chain rings, and you twist when you press down with your force power, and it bends the strain gauge, and then that translates that into watts. And the Fouriiii basically takes these strain gauges and has glued them onto the back of the crank, and it just measures the crank deflection, and that's how you do power. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because measuring strain and like deflection is a great place to do it in the cranks and the chain rings. In my opinion, where it's not a good place to do it is in the pedal, because there's a couple of reasons. Number one, you're standing on your pedals when you're pedaling, so you can like go downhill and you're standing on them, but you're still putting force on them. You have the road uh, variances and bumps, and yeah, so you have to factor that. You have to actually take that out of the way they calculate power. But really, the reason why I don't like pedal based power meters, take a look at your pedals, just anyone right now. Notice how they are all scratched up. They take a lot of beating. It's not a great place to put an expensive instrument on. And if you clip those in a corner, if you hit a rock while you're mountain biking, clip a curb or something, you're gonna ruin your power meter. And so we saw that a lot. And we were some of the early dealers of the Garmin pedal based power meter, and we gave a lot of refunds, to be honest. And like every single time Garmin would say you have to torque the you have to put the pedal on to torque spec. We bought like this expensive torque wrench, and we were torquing to spec, and everyone was like, this is not working. And what made it worse, the attraction of buying a pedal based power meter was, but everyone wanted to swap it from bike to bike. Buy one power meter, move your pedals over to a different bike. And that, while that was an attractive feature, the torque to spec thing kind of ruined that. And then, when you bang your pedal, that ruins it too. So not a great place for power meter. So that's all we got to say about the pedal based power meters. And that rules out Garmin and Wahoo and Osimo. I've had one athlete that loved their Osimo pedals. It's good data. It's just bad placement. And we'll be like
Yeah, I
Forrest
think,
Gump.
you know, as a coach, the this happens all the time when you look at a power file, whether it's on Training Peaks, and you see the PR medals, and sometimes, before I actually see the number, I'll see like, oh, he's got 10 PRs in there. I'm like, oh, great, he had an awesome workout. And then I
Right.
go and I look, and it's like max 5-second power 3,000 watts, max 1 minute power 1,500 watts. And
Mhm.
I hate to say it, but so many times that's come from the pedal based power meters. I think they have this weird finicky tendency to have power spikes, especially if you don't calibrate them or if you don't torque them right. I find that they just like will spit out these crazy values, and then as a coach I have to go in, I have to crop the data, I have to fix it. And, I've had athletes where it was like 3 rides a week. I was cropping their data, I was fixing it because, if I'm looking at their power curve, I want to see accurate data. But if I have values in there where they did 2,000 watts for a minute, it's going to skew the entire power curve. And so, yeah, so I don't like to bash anyone, but the pedal based power meters, I've just not had any good luck with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. You gave me PTSD from going back and editing out stages data when they first came out. And we could always tell as erroneous data, there'd be zero cadence and like, 500 watts when a rider went downhill. And you used to have to go back and just cut like 31-second little clips out of the data.
Oh man.
They eventually um, solved that and it got much better. But originally that was like, oh my god, you have to edit every
Yeah.
single file.
And that made me think when I had the first Gen 1 stages, I remember if you would ride by like a store that had automated doors, like a grocery store that had like sensor doors,
Yeah,
those sensors sent out like a wave frequency that would just make your power meter drop. And I think that's the other thing that as a coach is so frustrating if you have
yeah,
power meters that drop consistently. So it's like,
yeah,
you'll have a good 20 minutes and then they'll do a 10-minute threshold interval, but every minute it drops out for a second. If you do a 10-minute hard interval and you
mhm,
have, five different 2-second points of zero, it completely skews the data. And so it's really
totally.
frustrating as an athlete and as a coach when you just don't get complete sets of data. So I think along with the companies that are just more accurate, more consistent. You have the ones that are just better quality almost. And I
Yeah,
think there's some that, came to the market with, maybe not the best technology. And it's just not as good.
yeah. Like the Ergomo, remember that, the bottom bracket power meter?
Oh, yeah.
Th-
Well, the bottom bracket power meter thing is a whole another can of worms. Those definitely had their own problems. I think
yeah,
if you're not doing crank based, it's not worth it.
not worth it. So I'll tell a funny story, not a funny story, just a you were talking about data dropouts. And that was the thing when power meters first went wireless. You'd lose the signal, and you'd be like moving your power meter around, and trying to get it to reconnect, and that was the whole thing. And fortunately, that's been solved for. But way back in the day, I think everyone knows we used to have an indoor cycling studio. So we had a brick and mortar. So we did physiological testing, bike fitting. We did indoor cycling. We sold power meters, and of course the one-on-one coaching. And so when we did these indoor cycling classes, the first year we this is we decided we weren't going to use compu trainers. I didn't like them because they were eyesores. There was like wires everywhere, and I was like, I do
Hmm.
not want wires everywhere in our indoor cycling studio. So we got power beams made by PowerTap, and those were
Oh,
wireless.
yeah.
And the power meter was, so imagine like the olden, what we're calling a dumb trainer, so stationary trainer, and the power meter measurement was in the when you used to put your bike in the trainer and you'd crank down the rolling resistance on the back tire.
And then
Well, so that,
you had to do a
yeah,
calibration, a weird. I remember at least with CompuTrainer, you had to do a
roll
whole
down,
process to calibrate it. Yeah,
yeah,
roll
roll down.
down.
But yeah, you would take the roller from the stationary trainer, position it up against the tire, and that's where the power was coming from. However, they were wireless, and so we had these head units also from Ceres, these big yellow uh, units. They're about the size. Imagine like two decks of cards you put together. They were big. But because they were wireless, now we shared a wall with Subway, the sandwich shop. Now
Hmm.
on the other side of the wall was their microwave. It took us 6 months to figure this out. Now, when they microwaved a sandwich, everyone's power dropped out. And so we would be like doing a class, and everyone raised their hand. My power dropped out. We got, what the heck is going on? We raised such a ruckus with Saris. The CEO came out to visit us, Chris Fortune, and he brought two engineers, and they brought all their sensors and like their antennas, and they were like measuring the wireless frequencies and connectivities, and they no one figured it out that hey, it's the microwave that's ruining the signal and causing all these dropouts. But finally,
Did
it
you go?
dawned on
Did you
us.
go next door to Subway on your cell phone and have them start the microwave and ask Coach Isaiah to tell you if the power dropped out?
Well, the way that we figured this out is there was no power dropouts in the morning classes because Subway was closed. And at lunch in the evening, that was when the classes had the most dropouts. And when we figured this out, I went next door and I asked the guy, the owner, I'm like, hey, can we put this metal sheet behind your microwave to block the waves? And he wasn't having any of that. And
Uh,
but right after that, so we used the power beams only for 1 year. We were like, we got to get off of these. This is ruining it. So the next year, I bought a fleet of Power Tap SLs in the wheels. And what we would do, riders would come in and we would basically take their rear wheel out and put a Power Tap rear wheel in. We had the wireless head units. And so we did power based classes like that. And we did that for 2 years, and then the kickers came onto the market, and then we bought a fleet of kickers, and we did the power based kicker classes, and that's how we know they're inaccurate. I use the term inaccurate to 5 to 10%. We did that for 2 years, and then Zwift came out, and then we closed down. We were like, no one's coming in to indoor
yeah.
cycling anymore when you can do that at home.
But
Yeah,
that's a
that's
good segue, yeah, like into the realm of Zwift and trainers, which have obviously like only grown in popularity. And it seems like an easy way to then just have a power meter and an indoor system like all in one. And like you
yeah.
said, I guess they were not accurate when they first came out, but they've definitely gotten better.
Yeah, way better. And right before the podcast, as part, I was researching claimed accuracy. Wahoo Kicker, plus or minus 1%. Tax Neo, plus or minus 1%. Ironically, the Zwift Hub, the new Zwift Hub, the bike, they only
Hmm.
claim plus or minus a 2.5%. And I think
Hmm.
that's just their focus. And 2.5% is fine. I mean, if you're
Yeah, it's
doing
good.
300 watts, I mean, we're talking 10% is 30, 5% is 15, half 2.5% is 7.5 watts. So at any point in time, you could be doing 292.5 or 307.5. So
Yeah,
not that
not bad.
big of a deal. Um, but yeah, the 1% is a lot better. So 297, 303. I'll take that all day long. But yeah, so the smart trainers are now really accurate in a lot of, you were saying before we went on, you can tell if your outdoor power meter is reading high or low based on your smart trainer.
Yeah, so we've had the Ceres hammer for years, and I've got the third generation one. And what I did was I would simply dual record. I'd have Zwift open connected to the hammer, and then I would have my bike with my Cork power meter connected to my head unit, and I would do an
Mm-hmm.
interval, and I'd lap them, at the same time, and then I would compare that power between the two, and it was
Mm-hmm.
within like 1 to 2 watts, usually within like a watt. So that's as
Yeah.
good as it gets. And then I'd go, maybe we'd switch to a different power meter, and then I'd do the same test over again. Because if I knew my hammer was within a watt of my old power meter, that I could test a new one, and I could then see the accuracy. But yeah, so if it was, maybe 5 watts off, then I could be like, okay, like there could be a plus or minus 5 watt discrepancy. Nothing big, but yeah, I think now that the trainers are just as good as the power meters. And I think I think the companies now are kind of investing in both. I think Tax might be owned by Garmin, so they're trying to
Yep.
cross the technology together. I know Ceres obviously owned PowerTap for years, so yeah, I think you're now seeing that the indoor power accuracy is super good.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can like, it used to be like the advice was like, be careful reading too much into your power output indoors to outdoors because there could be some discrepancies between your indoor power. But now it's comparable 1 to 1. So when you do a field test indoors, you can easily uh, use that same number outdoors. Back in the day, because there was differences, athletes would say they have an indoor FTP and an outdoor FTP, and I was like, no, 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 no. You got one FTP. It's your physiology. It's just the limitations of riding indoors just due to the like rolling inertia and the torque, or it's the power is reading low or high. But now that's kind
Hmm.
of been normalized. A lot of the rolling inertia is really good, much improved, and the accuracy is much improved. So no need for two FTPs. That's also what gives us coaches gray hair is
Yeah.
adjusting FTPs. We don't. We have. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, I think the one thing, yeah, I deal with is just, especially with gravel being so popular now, everyone's got a separate gravel bike, and then they have a road bike, and then they have a mountain bike, and they're
Hmm.
using Garmin pedals on their mountain bike, and they're using a Fouriiii on their gravel bike, and they're using something else on their road bike. And, sometimes it's not like every ride they're going to be like, hey, this ride was on my gravel bike. This date was on my road bike, you know? And so as a coach, I'm like, trying to figure out what's what. Did they have a bad day? Did they have a really good day? Like, what's going on here? So, for all the athletes out there that want to do their coaches a favor, just, use the same power meter across the board. It's
Yeah.
the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. Yes. Wow. Wise words. You know what's also the right thing to do is developing software that just tells the coach which power meter data you're looking at. It's really easy to
Yeah,
do. Like this is Quark
yeah.
data. This is Four Eyes data. Not difficult. But that would help. Like the coach could have notes on like what power meter reads high or low or something like that. Yeah. Um, well, I think we covered most everything power meters. So, we haven't talked about head units. Garmin Wahoo Hammerhead, the new Koros is out. Some people are still using the Stages Dash. We had an athlete the other day write in. He was using the PC7. This is the first time I've heard anyone
Ah,
using that in a while. I used to use PC7. Um, yeah, that thing was the bomb, but it just got, it, Garmin, Oahu, and Hammerhead have just so many more features than the Power Control 7. And it was only really good to use with your SRM. But yeah, so I think we should do a whole new podcast some other time on head units because
mm-hmm.
it's a whole. I mean, it really just comes down to how you want to look at what certain different features. But the thing about power meters, because they are the ones that are generating the data, that's where you want to look at first. The head unit is just recording the data, so not as many quirks and things to consider. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Ricky, any other final thoughts on power meters, preferences, opinions?
I think it kind of just, repeating what we said before, I think you can really get lost in the sauce on what power meter to get and, what's the most accurate and, what has the best features. But I think really what it comes down to is like find a trusted brand that, is reputable for relaying consistent data and then, try to stick with it. And I think like we kind of said before, crank based power meters are pretty tried and true. They're tested. So I really don't think you can go wrong there. And I think, yeah, like we said, don't worry too much about, you know, quotation accuracy. Focus on consistency. And yeah, I think whatever you choose is as long as you're zero offsetting it pretty often and making sure that yeah, you're not crashing it or doing anything crazy. Most of them should be pretty good these days. The technology's getting pretty consistent across the board, but yeah, I don't think they're all created equal. So just try to find a good one and be nice on your coach and yeah, get him something that works well.
That's right. Yeah, prevent your coach from developing gray hair by ensuring the integrity of your data. That's what I would say. Yeah. Yeah, the
100%.
coach doesn't have to worry about compatibility. You're going to take care of that. This is the data integrity. So, everyone, thanks so much for listening. This episode will also be up on our YouTube channel. Big thanks to Ricky for being on the pod. Thanks, Ricky. Good to see you.
Yeah,
What
thanks
do you
for
got
having
coming
me.
up
Yeah.
next?
So I leave this week for the Volta, Portugal. It is a 11-day stage race, so it's a pretty big one. A lot of 10,000 plus foot climbing days, which has me excited. So, yeah, I'm
Nice.
pretty, other than the fact that it's supposed to be 100 degrees every day, I'm pretty excited for it.
Have you been doing your heat acclimation protocol that you podcasted
Oh,
about?
you betcha. Yeah, I've been either riding in the heat of the day. I've been overdressing. I think maybe some people saw on my Instagram me using the painter's suit, riding the trainer with no fan, absolutely dumping buckets of sweat. But yeah, I've been trying to get as much heat acclimation as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. You're putting walking the walk and talking the talk.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, good luck over there. I'm sure you're going to generate some great power data to analyze. And
Yeah.
listeners, thanks so much. Again, we'll be back here next week. And in the meantime, you know what to do, which is work hard, ride fast, have fun, and remember to FTFP, which consistency corrects for that. So, anyway, thanks for joining us and listening. We'll see you back here next time.